So welcome everybody. I'm going to introduce you the third lecture when we're talking about the energy use. In the previous lecture we analyzed the energy consumption divided by the region, by different nation, and we see how every different country approach to the energy supply. We analyze how the OPEC and the other Middle East affect the oil and gas supply. While in this lecture we're going to introduce how we consume our energy divided by sector, by nation, and how is the mix of energy that each country uses to produce electricity and the other kind of energy sources. So in this lecture we first of all describe the global energy consumption, and we will analyze the different sector of different country. Then we will talking about the energy use divided by the region. The region I intend for the region any different country and any different continent. Then we discuss the electricity production from fossil fuels and renewable energy. Then we try to introduce talking about a bit of the nuclear power plant to the production of the electricity, and we will also analyze the risks, the environmental impact, and also the economics aspect that is pretty important for the long period investment in the nuclear power plant. And the last, we finish to analyze the growing market of the renewable energy production around the world. So this lecture is divided first of all by the global energy consumption, the first subtopic. The second, we're talking about the energy use divided by sector, such as transportation, industrial and agricultural sector. Then we'll focus the attention on the home energy use, talking about the household consumption and divided by the different region, and we will see how each country have a different mix in terms of energy production, electricity production for home. And the last one is the energy use divided by the region. So first of all, I want to show you in this graph the primary energy consumption in 2016. So this is the last statistical review. So you can see that starting from the 91 until last year, 2016. So we will see how any kind of primary source never drop. There is a growing demand, a growing consumption around the world. So this is just a global perspective, so this is not focused on some typical region, but this is just a global situation. How you can see, first of all, the oil is one of the less growing source in terms of energy consumption. Renewable energy, you can see how start to increasing, but still represent, how we can see also in the previous lecture, just the 2% of the overall energy production and consumption. What is pretty important is how the natural gas increasing a lot, starting from 91 to 2016, basically represent almost the double in terms of energy consumption. Also the coal, that is not a really good sign, still represent a huge amount of consumption, that represent almost the 30% of the whole energy consumption around the world. While the nuclear energy basically remained the same from 91 to 2016, so there is any big change. And hydroelectricity also is another sector of energy production that remained quite constant in the last 2 decades. So in this graph I wanna show you how the share of globally primary energy consumption is changed, and how this is affect also the demand and supply of the energy. First of all, you can see how the oil that represent any hydrocarbons produced for the transportation, for the aviation, and also for the power plant producing the electricity is dropped compared to the 98 and 2016. This is the only one that dropped. This is caused by the increasing oil price per barrels and also by the financial crisis that also affect the price of the petrol. What is pretty important to see how the natural gas meanwhile keep going to represent an increasing amount of energy consumption, and also the renewable represent another increasing sector. So the only sector that is pretty interesting to look is the trend of oil that completely dropped in the last decade, while the renewable energy represent an increasing production, and the same we can see about the gas, the natural gas consumption. So we will see, first of all, we want to talking about the oil consumption per capita around the world. How you can see, North America and all the United States represent one of the first countries in the world in terms of oil consumption. This oil consumption represents the production for the transportation, but also the production for the power plant to produce electricity in USA. This is the same also for Canada. In Europe, basically, we are not very addicted to the oil consumption in terms of electricity production, because there is a huge amount of increase in renewable energy production. The Middle East and the Arabia Saudita, of course, represent another important and very heavy dependence on oil consumption, but it is due to the very low price of the petrol and the diesel in terms of transportation sector. That's the reason why they're still using maybe around the 90% of energy to produce electricity, transportation and industrial production. Australia is another very dependent from the oil, because they don't use the nuclear power plant. At the same time, the renewable energy production still represent a very low amount. Meanwhile, Australia they're still producing a lot of energy from natural gas, because they have a lot of reserve on the north of Australia and on Timor-Leste. The coal consumption represent a completely different situation compared to the oil and gas that we saw before. So first of all, you can see India and China and Australia represent the first country in terms of consumption. This is due, especially for India and China, is due to the fact that they didn't invest that much in renewable energy production in the last decade, and also because in that country the coal is very cheap and continue to be one of the biggest source for the energy production, and also for the electricity power plant. Also Australia facing the same situation like also New Zealand and all the Indonesia. From here you can see also that the Europe represent another important amount of coal consumption for the power plant, while the United States is the second after China and India in terms of coal production. But this is less than India and China. That is due to the fact that this country, they are talking about the USA, they're producing a lot of electricity from nuclear power plant, where they have more than 100 reactors at the moment activated. So the last one is the nuclear power plant. So this graph shows at global level all the power plants that at the moment are working. They're also considering that is missing, that there are only in few countries like Spain, Sweden and other little country in the north of Europe, while there is an increasing building first plant that is all part of the Middle East, while the other part of this one represent the building new plants. That is huge compared to the previous existing nuclear power plant. So Russia, India and China represent the first country in terms of investment in a nuclear power plant production, and also part of the South American. They are building new plants for the production of electricity from nuclear. And the last one, we want to show you how the renewable energy power plant investment is completely different compared to different country and different region. So, if you can see, first of all, you see that almost every country around the world facing a huge growth in terms of investment in renewable energy. We're talking about the wind energy production, the solar power plant, and also the geothermal. The only country that in the last 5-6 years dropped the production and investment in renewable energy is Europe, but this is caused, like I said in the previous lecture, this was caused in 2001, 2010 by the financial crisis, and there was a lot of different countries that they cut the public investment and aid to the new investment in renewable energy, in particular to the solar and wind energy production. USA, basically, you can see that the growing is a very growing and fast sector of the renewable energy, because also the aims that the United States is to reduce their dependency from the Middle East in terms of oil import. It's the same in Brazil, and the same around the world. Also China. China was one of the growing fast, especially for the solar, the photovoltaic panel in terms of electricity production. So the only country that facing a reduction is Europe in the last 5 years.